It was truly an adventure to use the restroom on a ship from the era of sail. A sailor might even put his life in danger to urinate, depending on the seaway. This is because, as you can see in this scene from the movie Master and Commander, the crew's restrooms were outside the ship and were subject to the weather in addition to prying eyes. This film explores the state of the restrooms on ships from the era of sail, delving deeply into the foul mysteries of seafaring. How sailors used the restroom during the era of sailing. To put it mildly, the hygienic conditions aboard sailing ships between the 15th through 19th centuries were dubious. Self-relieving facilities were available, although they were typically far too few. For instance, the Batavia, which set sail for India in 1628 from North Holland, had a crew of 350 men, but only 4 restrooms, 2 of which were designated for officials. For the other 2, the remainder of the team had to wait in line. These toilets were just plain benches with openings in the ship's head or bow. Because there were no cabins or anything like that, the heads were anything but private, and the waste just fell into the water through a short wooden boarding. At least there was a means to clean one's butt, according to historian Mike Dash. The only extra amenity was a long, dung-smeared rope that snaked through the hole in the latrine. The rope's frayed end, which hung in the ocean, could be pulled up and used to clean oneself. Maybe it was best to forego this luxury. In inclement weather, this disagreeable scenario got truly terrible. The crew was forced to use the restrooms below deck since it was too risky to use the bow restrooms in high seas. This was made worse by the closure of all gun ports and hatches in severe waves to keep water out and to stop the flow of fresh air. While the less polite men simply squatted over one of the ladders leading into the ship's hold to relieve themselves or urinated in a discreet area, the more polite men in this situation turned to chamber pots. Accidents were nearly unavoidable due to the ship's shaking and the inadequate lighting below deck, so even if they used a chamber pot, the contents typically didn't remain in place until the next day. The waste then trickled like a cascade from deck to deck via gutters and crevices until it eventually gathered in the ship's lowest section, the bilge. Since the wooden hulls of most ships were rarely completely waterproof, water eventually leaked in, necessitating the employment of a bilge pump to remove the muck. The disgorged pumps were deemed unfit for tongue and palate to taste, or nostrils to smell, or even eyes to see, for it comes out bubbling like hell and stinking like the devil, by Eugenio de Salazar, who visited the New World in 1573. Frequently, this underground fecal torrent could only be pumped onto the next higher deck, where it gradually flowed through sluices and hatches, rather than straight into the ocean. As the weather cleared, the crew made every effort to clean the ship and used incense and vinegar to cover up the inhumane stink. However, the effects of these actions were only temporary at best, and soon the ship's hull began to smell as though the plague itself was living there once more. These unsanitary circumstances were a serious issue, particularly as they offered a perfect environment for the growth of various illnesses. In order to dispose of human waste as tastefully as possible, sailors and shipbuilders came up with a number of techniques, table P66. During the age of sail, you had a lot of choices if you wanted to go number 2 on a ship. The excrement dropped straight into the water because they were all outside the ship. Smaller vessels would therefore be wise to maintain a certain distance. Otherwise, dropping a bomb, a euphemism, can turn into an unpleasant reality. Not everyone had the same alternatives for restrooms. The best restrooms were reserved for officers and affluent travelers. The captain's rooms and those of the wealthiest passengers were in the rear of the ship. By the late Middle Ages, most ships also featured more comfortable seating for those of higher class, known as guarderobes. At first, they simply profited from the fact that particular privies were set aside for them. These box-shaped annexes were affixed to the side or rear of the aftercastle and are also present in medieval castles. At least the user had the seat to himself, even though it was still just a plain board with a hole in it. In the 17th century, officers' restrooms were relocated to ships that were equipped with side galleries. As a result, the top passengers now had a distinct space that served as a lavatory, restroom, and luggage storage. The restrooms there provided privacy, a luxury that was highly uncommon on ships at the time. The latrines at the bow of the ship where regular sailors used the restrooms, were a whole other story. The bow had Spartan seats of ease. Prior to the 16th century, most individuals would only sit on a fence or squat over wooden gratings or holes in the floor planking. Later, as shown above on the Swedish galleon Vasa, basic seats were added to either side of the vessel. Freestanding seats, which typically had some boards or piping to guide the fall of the feces, increasingly took their place in the 17th century. To cut down on wait times, rows with several seat holes were created in the 18th and 19th centuries. Due of their exposure to wind, weather, and most importantly, waves, the restrooms on the galleon were essentially useless during stormy conditions. Additionally, sailors were supposed to only use the ship's open-air restrooms on the side that was not facing the wind. After one effort, landlubbers who did urinate against the wind typically learnt not to do it again. We'd like not to think about what it looked like behind the latrines after a few weeks at sea. The hull most likely had a foul-smelling layer of paint applied to it. The British Navy had its own method of assigning responsibility for cleaning up this mess, according to Vice Admiral William Monson's Naval Tracts. He who is first taken with a lie upon a Monday morning is proclaimed at the main mast with a general cry, "A liar, a liar, a liar." For that week, he is under the swabber and meddles not with making the ship clean within, but without. Beginning about 1700, one or two roundhouses for non-commissioned officers and the ill were typically added to the basic seats of comfort in the bow. Unlike the other latrines, the semicircular toilet stalls at the back of the heads were shuttered and provided some protection from water splashing and prying eyes. Other restrooms were frequently located amidships. Pissdales incorporated into the ship's sides offered a straightforward way to urinate starting in the 17th century. These were straightforward wooden or lead funnels with an external pipe. Similar to flower pots on the balcony, side shelves, or so-called steep tubs, were hung on the bulwarks close to the main chains in case a bowel movement was necessary. A sailor would climb into one of these tubs and squat over the keyhole-shaped entrance in the floor to lay a brick. The bow platform and its sanitary facilities vanished with the advent of steamships with steel hulls in the 19th century, which needed to be much more pointed to glide through the water effectively. The tubs amidships were swapped out with platforms with many holes, so that there would still be enough latrines. Toilet capacity was still an issue, though, as the British Duke of Wellington demonstrates. Even though the ship had a 6-hole platform on each side in 1870, there were queues of waiting men on each side of the upper deck struggling to reach the heads from 4 a.m. until long after pipe down at night. There was so much competition for the limited seats that some people did not arrive at their destination in time. Every day, a certain number of men were reported for decency-related violations. In numerous locations, it was necessary to remove the evidence of such offenses every morning.